Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I am joined by Roni Robbins. She is the author of Hands of Gold, One Man's Quest to Find the Silver Lining in Misfortune. And it is a story loosely based on events about a man who comes to America and tries to make his imprint on this country and goes through so many crazy events. And we're going to find out all about it and about the author. So, welcome, Roni, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak here.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, why don't we start from the beginning? Tell us a little bit about yourself and the book.
I'm a longtime journalist. I've been a journalist, a published journalist for some 37 years now. I'd like to think it was less than that, but it's been close to 4 decades. And for some major publications, too, among the mix, freelanced pieces have been picked up by Huffington Post and Forbes over the years. I presently am a freelancer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, my local newspaper, which is my roots anyway, from starting out in journalism as a news reporter, daily newspaper reporter, and also Medscape WebMD. I'm a freelancer for them after being an editor for them. So about a year ago, I changed over to freelance instead of full-time. I am now an author, so that's the newest leg of my journey as a writer. My grandfather left cassette tapes of his experiences, his near-death experiences and adventures in Europe and America. And I used that to create a novel. I changed all the names, made up a bunch of drama too, and won a number of awards on the book so far. And I go around the country talking about the book.
Excellent. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the book and what inspired you to write it?
So not only my grandfather's adventures in Europe and here in America, my grandparents died on the date of each other a year apart in the early 90s, on January 31st, which is a few days from now. So that date is pretty significant. My grandfather was a clinical trial patient for streptomycin, which was an experimental drug back then that saved his life, and countless others it's used today, and it paved the way for medicines that are used today to treat tuberculosis. He was told he was terminal with tuberculosis at 26, but he lived till 86. Obviously, I'm around, so he had a nice, long, fulfilling life, a family life. And they lost most of their family in the Holocaust, in Auschwitz. The Holocaust Remembrance Day was just a few days ago, and the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. So there's some definite history in this novel. My grandfather was involved in a workplace shooting spree. It was documented in a newspaper article in the New York Daily News. That was one of the publications that I ended up freelancing for. I had no idea that he was written in the paper, 1958. He talked to the gunman in the story, but in my novel, I take it further, and he saves people in that workplace shooting spree. He accidentally killed somebody. He lost a grown son to leukemia. So there were health struggles and financial struggles, and my grandmother had to be the breadwinner at one point, and they went on welfare. So it's the full life of a family. It's a family saga, multicultural fiction. It has a number of genres that it fits in: Holocaust biography, biographical literary fiction. And like I said, it won 6 awards. So including International Book Award and Global Book Awards in 2023, and a finalist in the Legacy Book Awards last year.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about writing process, because we do that with authors. Did you outline heavily? Did you research heavily? How did the book come together?
So I did not outline. I'm a journalist, so I don't even outline my stories per se. I have an idea and I just sort of go at it. Maybe it would have been better if I had an outline. I knew the beginning and the ending, and I knew how I wanted it to proceed, but I didn't quite write it down. I just kept writing it. As I wrote it, I might have, made notes to myself, come back, this should be this is where you go here, this is where you go there. But I pretty much just write. I don't want to delay myself with thinking too much about it. I just want to write. And then I reorganize. So that does take some time. So I may not be your traditional author in that I plot it all out, but I just spent a lot of time reworking. I did a lot of research. Yes, I did a lot of research to fill in the blanks. It is fiction, but it's based on reality, and I wanted to be historically accurate. So I took pains to make sure that I was. I have that background as a journalist, as a researcher, as an investigator. I physically went to locations to study national archives and family history centers in person before everything was online, to dive into the background that I wanted to make sure that I included in the novel, with genealogy and also a lot of pop culture about what was going on at the time, the Great Depression, the golden age of radio and television. It's pretty historically accurate. It should be historically accurate, even though it's a novel.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So now your grandfather, you mentioned the lost family, so he did not actually have to go to one of those terrible camps. He was in America by that time, but of course, family there, and all of a sudden, no more. So,
Right.
yeah,
Yes.
that's
He had
that's
to
a
deal with
lot.
the
It's very
guilt of it.
sobering.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
that's a very
Yeah.
sobering thing, especially, as the years go by and the information comes out, sort of thing.
Right.
It's right. Yeah.
And it's still in the news today, not just because it was Holocaust Remembrance Day, or that, we have like 2 times of the year at least where Holocaust memorials are going on. There is one again in more of a Jewish holiday, not holiday, commemoration in May, but and also in Israel in April usually. So, but he did have to deal with the guilt of having lost all his family, knowing that could he have done more there, but for the grace of God go I. And also anti-Semitism, like I said, is still in the news because of what happened in Israel is being compared to a mini Holocaust. It's hatred. It's the other, whatever the other is. It's persecution, it's discrimination, it's hatred. Still.
Yeah. We do seem to have sort of a latent anti-Semitism that's always bubbling beneath the surface, don't we?
We sure do. Yes.
Yeah. That's yes, and I always laugh. I have spent a good deal. My very, 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 very first journalistic interview I ever did. I was 19 years old in 2007, and here's how bold and dumb I was. I started calling prominent, like, racist, white supremacists, all this
Oh
type of thing.
no.
No, I literally would just like email them, find contact info, call them up, all this type of thing, and I got them to sit down and have conversations with me, sort of thing. And then I kind of wrote this whole story. It was because at the time there had been this murder somewhere in the Midwest, I forget now. And this young white couple had been killed by these 4 black people, and the story had gotten picked up by a lot of these white supremacist groups. And so it was going, and this is early internet, this is 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's going around all this type of thing. And so I'm kind of investigating, and I think this is all kind of very interesting. And whatnot. So I started talking to these people, and I always laugh whenever I interact with that community because one, I tend to be very fair with them. A lot of the stuff they say is absolutely terrible and should not honestly be said out loud in
Yeah.
polite company, but I give them a fair hearing, and I don't tend to just kind of do the knee-jerk reaction, and that gets me a lot of pull in that community. And so, I use that to my advantage to keep talking to people to find out what this was. Here's what I always find interesting. They don't like black people. Hi, that's us. They really don't like Jews. Like,
Right.
if they have to pick, they'll keep us before they keep
Oh.
Jewish people. I mean, it's just,
Oh.
and people forget, like, even the KKK, in all their charters and everything, the first group they met before they get to black people, they're after Jews. Like they were like second, third in line.
Yeah.
And so it's always there, kind of bubbling underneath the surface, which I kind of always find very, difficult and a bit frightening. And obviously, and recently you've had some synagogue shootings and other terrible things that happen and sort of
Right.
thing. And so it's always there, just bubbling
Yes.
underneath the surface. So,
Hmm.
um, what was it like for you emotionally writing this book?
So, as a journalist, and I'd love to hear you were a journalist too, just to switch it back, where were you a journalist?
Well, nothing in it nearly as
Oh,
prestigious
oh,
as you are.
oh,
So
oh, well, but
I started out
still,
writing for this little online website called Associated Content that later became Yahoo Voices. And then being that no publication really ever wanted to pick up what I did, I started the other half of this, the Cameron Journal podcast, is
right,
CameronJournal.com, where I write all day, every day. I do a news hour every Monday night and a newsletter on news and politics that goes out every Saturday morning. And
great.
thank you. And so so I just wanted to write about, interesting stuff that happened. But I did the whole path of I wrote for my college newspaper, which is now a website. I think I was in one of the last editions ever we printed on paper. And which is now a website, all this
Me
sort of
too.
thing. Yeah. And so I kind of took that path, and I went to a school with a great journalism school, didn't really go there because I was majoring in political science sort of thing. And so I kind of started on that, worked for my college radio station. I'd worked in broadcast, and then I got into magazines is what I did. So I ran my first magazine when I was 21 years old, and
Wow.
then I took a break from politics and everything. I did fashion, nightlife, adult entertainment for a long time. And then when that all kind of ended and fell apart, I started this, and I would do, and then so this will is I so every week there's the news hour, and then there's one or two interviews because I like talking to people and all this type of thing. And fortunately, this medium came along at the right time for me to take advantage of it, sort of thing. So yeah, so that's how we.
So as a journalist, I just wondered if you would relate to this, but you take the emotions out of the conversation. So like you said, you were unbiased and didn't show that you might be annoyed by what a neo-Nazi or skinhead or what have you, white supremacist would say. And I've had similar situations, not that they can't tell that I'm Jewish, but I've been around them,
Yeah.
but covering rallies and such. But I would say that as far as the emotions that went into this book, yes, there were emotions. I wrote about my grandparents' last years together. I wrote about their deaths. But I tried to separate myself from that. Of course, it's my family story, but I knew if I pulled at the heartstrings of others, if I cried, then my readers would cry. Was I trying to make my readers cry? Maybe, because you can't really. I always liked a good cry after a movie.
Right.
It really showed that you were invested into the characters. If nobody cried at the end, if nobody felt what these characters went through and what it would have been like for them, if they couldn't empathize with the characters, then I did not do a good job of painting their lives as being worth that in the end, or worth that after spending some time reading their story. So I do believe that it was emotional for me, and I needed it to be emotional for me, and I needed to make sure that I conveyed that through the writing also.
No, well, I was curious about that because oftentimes books like this written by journalists can come off as very dry. And it's kind of important, and it's kind of it's too bad you didn't have somebody with a more creative mind to come along and be like, no, now unlike what you have been trained to do, now is the time for heart, now is the time for emotion, now is the time to present this material in in this way. And there's lots of times where even in journalism it can be, with certain stories it can be a bit hard to yank emotion out of it, especially if you have thoughts and feelings on the matter. And that and all the stuff that I've written as the years have gone by, some things are very easy. When I'm writing about climate change and whatnot, very easy. Well, when we're writing about maybe some other things going on in the country or conflict overseas, it's a little bit harder. Um, and so yes, that's good that you were able to go there and access that and felt free and felt liberty to do that. That's amazing.
Well, but the story is not just sad. There are sad parts, but you're talking about romance. There's sex in the book, would you believe? There's as a natural part of romance, there's family, culture, there's humor in it. So there's ups and downs as there is in life. There's celebrations and achievements and a triumph over adversity. So you feel all of that, and hopefully the readers will laugh when something is funny too, or just that my grandfather was quite the character. He had a sense of humor about himself. You get into his mind. What is he thinking at the moment? And sometimes it can be quite humorous, just to hear his brain working. And so I think that you always have times of celebration also within a life, and that is also depicted. And so,
Yeah, yeah. Yes, and I think that is that's very important. So when did so it talks about he gets involved in the labor disputes of the early 20th century. When did your family get to America?
that was it. It
Ah,
was 1920s,
oh, okay,
maybe a little bit
good.
before turn of the century.
Nice.
So between the wars, he left. World War One was it was after World War One and before World War Two. So and he came to find a better life, as other immigrants have, and are continuing to try to come here to find a better life. And he was trying to also escape being conscripted into the Czechoslovakian army, and also anti-Semitism is he was looking for that kind of freedom as a secondary. He didn't want to be a farmer. He didn't want to struggle. He did struggle here, but because of his health challenges, and he did odd jobs along the way, but he used his farming skills, but he just didn't want to be involved in the family business and continue to just grow up and live forever with around his family.
Many such cases. So
Can't we
yes.
relate? Yes.
Yes, yes, absolutely. There's a lot of people who were kind of like, I am not staying down on the farm doing all of this. It's a different idea. So,
Yeah.
and it's a brave person who's willing to uproot their life and do that, sort of thing. I think people realize how that's not an easy for anybody to leave behind a family, everything you've known, language, all this type of thing, turn up at a whole new place and start over from zero, knowing almost nobody, maybe a acquaintance, a cousin if you're lucky, all this type of thing, but oftentimes no one, and just starting over, in the process of finding a job, finding housing, all this type of thing. It's yeah,
Well,
it's
he was
very
young.
brave.
He was young, and he had siblings here that helped him.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. Very, very helpful.
Yeah.
So that's excellent. No, in terms of the writing process, how long does it take you?
Way too long, but so 20 years from start to some 20 years from start to finish. So I started when my children were young. I decided that I couldn't do full-time journalism anymore, that I couldn't do that while I was raising my family, because everything was getting shortchanged. My children, for sure, were getting shortchanged as I stuck them in daycare so that I could go cover a story, and deadlines didn't care what my childcare situation was. So we'd be late to get my son from daycare a lot. So I decided to stay at home, and so I was doing three things at once. I was keeping my hand in journalism as a freelancer, which worked out pretty well for me because I wrote for my articles and were in some big publications, and I wrote for publications I might not have been able to write for had I been working full time. I raised my children at home, and was their main educator for their early years, at least, getting them a head start where they wouldn't have gotten that in a daycare setting during the day, every day. And then I wrote this book while they were napping or at school. So it did take me a long time. 7 years to write it is what I figured now, and on and off during that time. And then I revised and revised and revised because I entered the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award contest in 2007, and it took me 2 more years to win it in 2009 for the opening of the book. I was a quarterfinalist in that contest. So that was the first indication that it might be, I might be willing to let it out there. I was afraid. Yes, I was a published writer, but a journalist, but that didn't mean that I was a published author. So I wasn't sure of myself, and I had cold feet, and I had imposter syndrome about the whole being an author and whether I was good enough, whether I ranked with authors, whether anyone would want to read my book. So I kept fighting for a traditional publisher because I felt like that was the ultimate of, if you get approved at that level, then it's ready, then it's worthy of something. So there was the award that I won, and a few agents said, they were interested in the book, but it took another decade for me to find that traditional publisher, on and off of raising my children and also freelancing, before I found a publisher. And then I worked with my first publisher for 2 years, got cold feet again, jinxed it a little bit. And I wanted to have a LLC to protect myself in case somebody sued me, family member who didn't. But my publisher got scared away. So I caused my own trouble, and which happens in life, And it took me about 6 months more before I found the publisher that took it to the finish line. Has been so great and supportive. Where others said no to another immigrant story, she says yes. And she's had the publisher is Amsterdam Publishers, the largest European publisher of Holocaust memoirs. Mine is a fiction based on true life, but touching on the Holocaust, not all about the Holocaust. And so I held out for that, for the golden ticket per se. And I got it. And my second publisher was so much more responsive than my first publisher. And I'm part of an organization with some more than 100 titles, and some of them are bestsellers. I'm still waiting to be a bestseller. I've had some successes for sure. The awards, I've had bestseller. I've made the bestseller list for Amazon. And I've been in the teens anyway, or it was 22 last month on Holocaust biography or Holocaust or biographical literary fiction. So it's hit those low numbers. I never really saw what it did when it came out because I didn't even know you could check that. But I hear that when your book first comes out, it's like bestseller for 2 seconds. So I never really checked to see how high, low, what the numbers were. I guess you want to have a low number, you want to be near number 1. So I've had it in the teens and 20 just as recently as earlier this month, but it doesn't stay there long. It's in the top 200 right now for both of those categories. So
And with the volume, that's important. That's very for the volume that's out there. That's an amazing thing because you've cleared a lot of other stuff. So
it's,
that's
I
quite
don't know whether it
impressive.
means anything. It means that people are at least looking at the book, whether they buy it or not, that's a different story. So 20 something years, it's the life of my children. It went through the life of my daughter basically from start to finish. She's 25. It wasn't quite 25, but it started when she was born, was my goal to write this while I was raising my children and freelancing.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I mean, that's very impressive. And here's the thing I love about that story, and I talk about this in my course a lot. A lot of people worry about finding time to write, and I say, well, it sometimes, especially if you have a family, it's an hour here, an hour there, a half hour here, all this type of thing. And I think it's so important for people who might be nervous about getting into it or sad that they're not getting enough done to hear your story and to know that it is possible. It might take a little bit longer than you planned, but it is definitely possible, and you can still go through the journey and get your work out there into the world. So that's why I asked that question because
Yeah.
it's always it's always interesting to see how what people did and how they got there and how long it took and all this sort of thing. So that's fantastic.
Amazingly persistent, and I counted. I had 50 rejections. Some people like to quote that,
Yeah.
but I had like 45 or 46 rejections. I thought I had 200 because I had two big folders. I kept every correspondence, but it turned out it was 50. So hopefully
Yeah.
someday I'll be able to say, see, 50 people said no, but it doesn't matter because I had two that said yes, and one who took me to the finish line to be able to have a published novel, a professionally published novel, and then, like I said, win some awards. I was in a big book festival. The book is in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. It's been in the Jerusalem Post and Washington Jewish Week, some big publications. Helps that I'm also a journalist and have connections to those two people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That makes for excellent and easy promotion. So
Mm.
that's incredibly good. When it comes to the kind of the process of the story, how did you pick the events from your grandparents' life to put in the book? Did you try to put everything and then got rid of, or did you say, ah, these are the good ones, let's focus on these? What was that process like? I say
So
because I've written a book about my grandmother's family and life, and I had to do a lot of triage. Like, yes, these things, not any of that. So I wonder how did you sort what was good?
thing from the tapes in, first draft,
Yeah,
and then decided to weed through it a bit. But most everything from the cassette tapes ended up in the book. I think where my publisher and her staff helped to streamline and bring out the really important parts of the book. I knew the main excitement drama would be the fact that they died a year to the date of each other, the romance, the meeting of each other and their separate lives and how they came together. The TB, the tuberculosis, was a big healthcare challenge, was a big part of the novel, and certainly him making history as a part of that clinical trial for this breakthrough, groundbreaking, that's probably the same thing, treatment that's still used today. And like I said, tuberculosis was bubbling under the surface always. It didn't disappear. People think, oh, didn't we get rid of that? No, it's the largest infectious disease killer in the world, regardless of what everyone thinks happened with COVID.
yeah.
But
No, I used to be on the health board in Weld County, Colorado, and tuberculosis testing and treatment was far and away our biggest budget expenditure. And this is a county of not even 100,000 people. Well, maybe it is now, but back then I think we only had maybe about 100,000 people, and it was our biggest. But we had the whole half the building spent their time tracking, testing, all this. I mean, it was a huge, absolutely massive operation. And people don't realize that the reason why it's not as common anymore is because there's this huge public health apparatus that stops it from spreading because it's so deadly and spreads so easily.
Yeah, so I knew that that was the historical aspects of the novel. The I knew that the Holocaust had to be in there. I knew that
Right.
now he didn't go through the Holocaust, but he had a brother that went through the Holocaust, and so you hear about their story because there's a reuniting scene in the novel. So you hear about the Holocaust per their example, per based on what they went through. So that had to be in the novel. The workplace shooting spree had to be in the novel. I mean, these are historical moments that needed to be in the novel, and I thought were worth covering. Losing a son. These are all part of it. What my editors helped, what the first publisher and then the second publisher helped to make sure that there's enough attention to the different parts of the story that really were the pivotal moments in the novel. And then make sure that I left out so much about the struggle, the financial, the money, the wealth, the gaining of the business in Europe may have bogged down things too much. The storyline had to move forward, and if it was congested by the fact that they were trying so hard to make money and this way and that way of making money and it needed to be streamlined. Too much mention of the gold part of the Hands of Gold. Too much mention about wealth, about the
Yeah.
lack of wealth, about the struggle that needed the readers needed to move along quicker than I was allowing them to. So that's where a good editor and a good publisher can work together to make sure that the readers remain engaged, flipping pages, which is the goal, right?
No, yeah, no. When I do developmental editing, I have a new project coming out this year that's about a medical malpractice trial that I edited for someone and have shepherded through the publication process. And that was one of the things we confronted very early on was, oh my goodness, we're getting bogged down because it was in the first version, it was the complete trial testimony. And I'm kind of like, okay, half that's getting cut because it's too
Mhm.
tedious. No one's going to want to read it. We've got to keep things moving along. So we went through and kind of found what are the important bits. Good, let's do those. And so that we could kind of keep the story moving along. So, it's a good thing, and that yeah, that's and you don't feel bad. A lot of people, even myself, I will write out something that I think is very important. I come back and read it later, and it's kind of like, why is this here? No one
Mm,
cares. Dump it
right,
overboard, sort of thing.
right.
And I always get surprised. I have a new book coming out later this year that's nonfiction, and I'm always
Congratulations.
thank you. I'm always surprised when I just finished doing the edits for it, and it was kind of like the stuff was kind of like oh, this is a bit too. Do we really need to know all this sort of thing? And I'm kind of like, actually, no, we don't. Let's get rid, sort of thing. So that's where I always say when I'm teaching writing or whatever have you, that's when writing comes alive. Is in the edit, in that refining process, because then we have just the information we need to make the world come alive. So it's so great that you had wonderful people to help you through that process. So
Yeah,
because it's never
I'm
perfect
not
on draft one.
so arrogant, even as a reporter and a writer and an editor professionally. I know that everyone needs to be edited.
Yep,
Editors need to be edited. Somebody else needs to put eyes on what you write.
absolutely.
I have my husband read over my stories that I submit now. Just to make sure that I'm not being redundant, that and that, and he might have suggestions for how to cut my stories. So
Yeah.
it's always good to have another set of eyes on things. And I had lots of eyes on this book before it went out. And the first draft was probably pretty boring, just a straight history, a straight life of somebody. And then I made it, I worked on it a lot to make it so that it's not just one voice. And that's where I changed the names, added much more dialogue, which was very challenging for somebody who's used to getting interviews. And like I said, change the names, took some liberties, make things more dramatic.
Yeah.
So
No,
yeah.
that's fantastic. All right. Well, we've come to the part of the show where we do plugs. So, why don't you tell us where we can keep track of you online and where we can buy this exciting book?
Well, Amazon and everywhere books are sold, Barnes and Noble, on all of these are online. Walmart, Target, Books A Million, Goodreads, anywhere you would buy books. Some bookstores have it, and it's in some libraries all over the country. You can look up worldcat.org and find it there. My website has so much information, www.ronirobbins.com. Now you got to spell my name right, RoniRobbins. .com, and you'll learn everything you can possibly want to know about the book, about me, my background, where I'm going to be speaking next, all my podcasts that I've been on, media, newspaper articles that have been written about me. So book club discussion points. I'm on Facebook, either as Roni Robbins or Roni Kane, Kayne was my maiden name, Roni Kane Robbins. Or I have two of them that are associated with the book, Hands of Gold. They usually do say Roni Robbins on them too, but there's a page for Hands of Gold. I've got two Twitters, one for my professional life as a journalist and one for this book. I mostly just use the one. I mostly just use the Roni Kane Robbins on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. No, it's called X. Like I just said, yeah, it's X. Two Twitters, and I've got an Instagram that either Roni Robbins, Hands of Gold novel might be one. I think I was hacked on the Hands of Gold novel. I have. I mentioned Instagram, TikTok
Yes.
Also.
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent.
All over the place.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Good luck.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.